12 longships don't just appear in your harbor by accident. They come for blood, for honor, or for war. And Edith of Saltmere was about to discover which one it was. But let's go back to where it all started, just one day earlier. The North Sea wind was beating down mercilessly on Edith's village, somewhere between York and nowhere, when she first spotted the small figure stumbling across the rocky shore. At 32, Edith had seen plenty of trouble in her years since Aldred's death, but something about this particular morning felt different, wrong even. She was mending a broken fishing net near the tide pools when movement caught her eye. A child, couldn't be more than 8 or 9 summers, was walking in unsteady zigzags toward the water's edge. The kid's clothes were torn, rough-spun garments that had seen better days, and even from a distance, Edith could see the way hunger made each step a struggle. Most villagers in these parts would have reached for a weapon first and asked questions later. The relationship between Saxons and Viking raiders had been tense for years, with blood and counter-raids keeping everyone on edge, but Edith had always been different, maybe too different for her own good. She set down her net and walked slowly toward the child, hands visible and movements deliberate. As she got closer, she could see it was a young girl, her hair the color of wheat straw and skin blue pale from cold. She looked up at Edith with a mixture of fear and desperation that hit her like a punch to the gut. The girl spoke in rapid Norse words Edith couldn't understand, but her meaning was clear enough. She was starving, maybe hadn't eaten in days. Her small hands gestured toward her mouth, then toward the water, a universal language of need that transcended any cultural barriers. But it was what circled the girl's thin wrist that made Edith's blood run cold. A twisted silver arm ring, worked with intricate knotwork she'd seen before on the bodies of dead raiders. And around her neck, barely visible beneath torn cloth, was a small hammer pendant wrought in gold. Viking nobility. This wasn't just any child. This was a Jarl's daughter. Edith thought about her neighbors, about what they'd say if they saw her helping a Viking child. She thought about the warnings she'd heard about recent raids on coastal villages. She thought about the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do. Then she looked into those desperate eyes again and remembered her husband Aldred falling to his knees in their burning fields, a Danish axe between his shoulder blades. The memory should have made her walk away. Instead, it made her decision for her. Without a word, Edith scooped the girl up in her arms. She weighed almost nothing, all sharp bones and hollow spaces where flesh should be. The child didn't resist, too weak to fight even if she'd wanted to. As Edith carried her toward the village, she could feel the girl's tiny body trembling, whether from fever or cold or both. Inside her modest cottage, Edith sat her down gently on the sleeping bench and moved quickly to prepare food. She had some leftover pottage from the night before, still warm over the embers, and bread she'd baked that morning. The smell of food seemed to revive the girl slightly, and for the first time, Edith saw something that might have been hope flicker in her pale blue eyes. As she ladled the thick stew into a wooden bowl, Edith caught her reflection in the girl's silver arm ring. If this child was who she thought she was, the daughter of some powerful Jarl, then helping her was either the best decision of Edith's life or the last one she'd ever make. The girl finished eating and looked up at Edith with something that might have been gratitude. But as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the cottage floor, Edith couldn't shake the feeling that she had just lit a signal fire that would bring either salvation or destruction to her door. The girl fell asleep on Edith's bench within an hour, exhaustion finally overtaking her small frame. Edith covered her with her only good blanket and tried to convince herself she'd done the right thing. But as evening approached, that conviction started to crumble. That first night, the child tossed with fever dreams, crying out in Norse words that sounded like names, perhaps family, perhaps the dead. Edith sat beside her through the dark hours, cooling her face with damp cloth, spooning water between cracked lips when the girl would take it. By dawn, the fever had broken, leaving them both exhausted. The next day passed in cautious silence. The girl was too weak to stand for long, but she watched Edith's every movement with those pale blue eyes. When Edith mended fishing nets, the girl tried to help with trembling fingers. When Edith prepared meals, the girl waited until Edith ate first, the habit of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. It was on the third morning that she finally spoke. Her eyes opened with awareness, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with the sharp intelligence of someone bred to notice everything that might threaten or aid her. "Why?" she asked in heavily accented English. Because you were dying. The girl struggled to sit up. I am your enemy. You're a child. I am Astrid Eriksdotter, the girl said, each word careful and precise. My father is Jarl Erik the Red of the Eastern settlements. Your people and mine have spilled much blood. Erik the Red. Edith felt her throat tighten. She knew that name. He'd led raids from Ireland to Francia, and his longships had been seen off the English coast just last season. I know who your father is, Edith said quietly. Astrid's eyes sharpened. Then you know what I am worth to you, dead or alive. I know what you're worth as a child who needed help. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the dying embers. The Saxon widow and the Viking Jarl's daughter, separated by blood and grief, but united by the simple fact that one had saved the other. The sound of voices outside made them both freeze. Rough men's voices, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. Edith, came her neighbor Godwin's call. We need to speak with you. Before she could answer, the door burst open. Godwin entered with Cuthbert, the sheriff's deputy, and behind them crowded the faces of half the village. Their eyes went immediately to Astrid, still wrapped in Edith's spare cloak, and the reaction was instant. Sweet Christ preserve us, Godwin breathed. You've got one of them in your house. She was dying, Edith said. She should have, Cuthbert replied, hand moving to his sword. Do you know what you've done? When her people come looking, and they will come, they'll think we took her. They'll burn the whole village. Astrid stepped forward despite her obvious weakness, chin raised with unconscious arrogance. I am Astrid Eriksdotter, daughter of Jarl Erik the Red. If you mean me harm, know that my death will not go unavenged. The threat sent a ripple of fear through the villagers. These were farmers and fishermen, not warriors. They knew what Viking vengeance looked like. All the more reason to end this now, Godwin said, but his hand shook on his weapon. Before her people arrive. They will come, Astrid said simply. The question is what they will find. Edith felt the weight of choice settling on her shoulders. She could step aside, let the villagers take the girl, claim she'd been deceived about her identity. It would be safe, smart. Instead, she moved to stand beside Astrid. She's under my protection. Your protection? Cuthbert laughed harshly. You're a widow, Edith. You have no authority here. Then I'll make my own. The words surprised her as she spoke them, but they felt true. For 2 years since Aldred's death, she'd lived as half a person. Now, with this dangerous child beside her, she felt solid again. The standoff stretched like a bowstring in the morning air. More villagers gathered outside, first curious, then hostile, as word spread. By midday, nearly 30 people surrounded her cottage. Someone threw a stone that cracked against her shutter. Another shouted about burning out the Viking lover. Father Benedict arrived with his walking stick, pointing it at her door like a weapon. That child is spawn of the devil, he declared. You harbor evil, Edith. I harbor a starving child, she replied, though her voice shook now. Give her up, someone called from the crowd, before you damn us all. But Edith held her ground, and as the sun climbed higher, something else began to appear on the horizon. Ships. Not one or two, but many. Long, low shapes emerging from the morning mist, like predators scenting blood. Astrid moved to the window despite her weakness. How many can you count? Edith began counting, her heart sinking with each new vessel that emerged from the fog. 1, 2, 3. She held up her fingers like Astrid might have done. 5, 6, 7. The mist kept parting, revealing more. 10, 11, 12. Her legs went weak. 12 ships meant hundreds of warriors, enough to burn every village from here to York. He brought his full war fleet, Astrid said quietly. This is not just rescue, this is a statement. The longships beached themselves on the shore below the village. Warriors poured from their hulls, hundreds of them, armed with spears and axes and round shields painted with fierce designs. But they didn't charge up the beach in wild fury. Instead, they formed ordered ranks with military precision. A single figure separated from the mass of warriors and began walking up the path toward the village. Even from a distance, there was no mistaking the red-bearded giant who moved with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a battle. Erik the Red had come for his daughter. The villagers scattered like leaves before a storm wind, but Edith remained at her window, watching death approach with steady steps. He comes alone first, Astrid observed. That means he wants to talk before deciding whether to burn everything. The knock on the door, when it came, was measured, the rap of someone accustomed to having doors opened. Edith smoothed her skirts and opened it to find Eric the Red filling the entire doorway. He was taller than any man she'd ever seen, with shoulders like an ox and hands that looked capable of crushing stone. His red beard was streaked with silver, and scars crisscrossed his arms like a map of old battles. But his eyes, the same pale blue as his daughter's, burned with intelligence and barely contained violence. "You are the widow," Eric said. His English was accented but clear. "I am Edith of Saltmere." Eric's gaze moved past her to where Astrid sat on the bench, still wearing Edith's spare clothes. For a moment, his expression softened with relief and what might have been love. But when he looked back at Edith, his face was stone. "My daughter tells me you found her dying on your shore." "Yes. She tells me you knew what she was, who she was, and chose to help her anyway." Edith felt her throat go dry. "Yes." Eric stepped into the cottage without invitation, his presence making the small space feel even smaller. "Do you know who I am?" "You are Eric the Red, Jarl of the Eastern Settlements. And do you know what my people have done to yours?" The question hung heavy in the air. "I know you led the raid that killed my husband." Eric's hand moved to the axe at his belt, not a threat, just unconscious habit. "And yet you saved my child." "Yes." "Why?" It was the same question everyone asked, the one with no good answer that would satisfy anyone looking for logic and mercy. "Because she needed help." Eric knelt beside his daughter, checking her for injuries with the careful hands of someone who'd lost children before. "Are you well, little Raven?" "I am well, Father, thanks to her." When Eric saw the clothes she wore, clearly Saxon garments too large for her frame, his expression darkened. "Whose are these?" "Mine," Edith said quickly. "Her own were ruined by salt and fever." Eric lifted the fabric to his nose, breathing in the scent that still clung to it. His eyes closed for a moment, and when he opened them, something had shifted in his expression. "These belong to a warrior. My husband was a farmer." "No." Eric's voice was certain. "I remember him. Red hair, strong shoulders. He stood over a fallen neighbor when we came, refused to run even when death was certain. I granted him a clean end for his courage." The words hit Edith like a physical blow. Her knees nearly buckled. "You remember him?" "I remember all the brave ones, then and now." He stood, towering over both women again. "But there is still a problem. My warriors cannot return empty-handed. They expected to find a kidnapper tonight, perhaps to burn this place to ash. Instead, they find kindness where they expected cruelty." Edith's blood turned to ice. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that even though you meant no harm, my people expected justice. If they don't get satisfaction..." Eric gestured toward the door where the sound of restless voices could be heard. Before he could continue, a commotion arose outside, raised voices, the scrape of metal on metal. Through the window, Edith could see Eric's warriors shifting restlessly. One of them, a scarred giant with braided beard, stepped forward and pointed his spear toward the cottage. "Bjorn Ironside," Astrid whispered to Edith. "My father's war chief. He lost a son to Saxon raids. He believes any mercy shown to our enemies makes us weak." Eric stepped outside and Edith heard him address the warrior in Norse, calm but firm. Bjorn's response was louder, challenging, and other warriors began choosing sides. That's when Astrid did something unexpected. She walked outside despite her weakness and stepped between the two men, speaking in rapid, passionate Norse. As she spoke, pointing first to Edith, then to herself, then mimicking eating and sleeping, Bjorn's expression shifted from rage to confusion to something that might have been shame. Other warriors, who had been moving to support their war chief, stopped and listened. "What did you tell them?" Edith asked when they returned. "The truth. How I wandered lost for 3 days after the storm scattered our ships. How I crawled across sharp rocks until my knees bled. How I drank rainwater from puddles and ate grass when I could find it. How I expected to die alone until you found me." Astrid's voice grew stronger. "I told them you could have sold me for enough silver to live like a queen, but instead you simply fed me and asked for nothing." Eric's expression had changed too. "She has turned a war party into a council meeting. But now comes the harder test. My warriors will not be satisfied with words alone. You must prove your worth to them as you proved it to me. How? There is an old way among my people, trial by ordeal, not of pain, but of truth. You must stand before my shiplords and speak your reasons. If they judge you worthy, you live. If not—" He didn't finish, but his meaning was clear. Edith felt her mouth go dry. When? Now, while the blood is still hot and decisions carry weight. Before Edith could respond, new sounds drifted across the water, the deep rhythmic blast of Saxon war horns. A scout burst through the door, face pale with urgency. "Jarl, armed riders approach. 40 mounted men with the Earl's banner. They'll be here before sunset." Eric's expression turned to stone. "So, your Earl thinks to take by force what honor should grant freely." "Jarl, armed riders approach. 60 mounted men with the Earl's banner, and behind them, foot soldiers. They'll be here within the hour." Edith's blood turned to ice. Not 40 men, but 60, with more coming. This wasn't a rescue. This was an army. Eric's face went stone hard. "So, your Earl brings overwhelming force to take by violence what honor should grant freely." The mathematics were brutal. 60 knights plus foot soldiers against 300 Vikings would be a slaughter, but not without terrible cost. And caught between them would be every person Edith had ever known. "There's no time for your trial," she said. "I have to stop this. You will do no such thing. The moment you step toward those riders, my warriors will think you're fleeing to them. They'll cut you down before you take 10 steps. Then what do you propose?" Eric's smile was sharp as a blade's edge. "We give both armies what they expect, a judgment, but not the kind either side will see coming." The two forces formed up as storm clouds gathered overhead. Eric's warriors made their shield wall on the beach, 300 men in battle gear, axes gleaming, faces painted for war. On the hill above, Earl William's cavalry took position, 60 knights in mail with lances, and behind them, twice that many foot soldiers with spears and crossbows. Between the armies, the village lay empty except for dogs and ravens. Sir Dunstan rode forward under a truce banner, but beside him came Sir Godric the Black with his hand already on his sword hilt. Behind them, a cluster of mounted sergeants waited like hunting hounds straining at the leash. "By order of Earl William," Sir Godric's voice boomed across the field, "the Saxon woman will surrender herself to English justice for giving aid to our enemies." Eric stepped forward, and Edith found herself walking beside him with Astrid on her other side. Behind them, the Vikings raised their shields in unison, a sound like thunder that made the Saxon horses shy. "The woman stands under my protection," Eric called back. "She owes no debt to your justice." Sir Godric's sword came free with a rasp of steel. "She harbored Viking spawn while good Christian folk lay murdered in their beds. She'll face the rope for treason." "Treason?" Eric's laugh was like breaking ice. "For showing mercy to a dying child? For consorting with heathens and murderers?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Edith felt every eye upon her, Viking and Saxon, warrior and priest, friend and enemy. This was the moment that would determine not just her fate, but whether children in both armies would grow up without fathers. But instead of fear, something else rose in her chest. Anger. "You speak of murder," she called out, her voice carrying farther than she'd expected. "My husband lies in the ground because of Viking axes. I have more reason than any of you to hate them. Yet when I found a child dying on my shore, a child who never held a weapon, never burned a church, never took a life, I chose to save her. And for that you would hang me?" Sir Godric raised his sword toward her. "Sentiment doesn't excuse." "It wasn't sentiment," Edith's voice cracked like a whip. "It was humanity, something you seem to have forgotten in your rush to spill blood." "Enough words," Sir Godric snarled. "Surrender now, or we take you by force." That's when Eric did something that shocked both armies. He knelt, not in submission, but to drive his sword point first into the sand between the opposing forces. When he stood, his voice carried the authority of someone who'd commanded men in 100 battles. "I invoke the right of ordeal by combat, single combat, to first blood only. If your champion wins, the woman goes with you freely. If mine wins, she sails with us under my protection, and this matter ends forever." Sir Godric's eyes gleamed. "Who is your champion?" Eric's hand fell on Edith's shoulder. She is. The words hit like a physical blow. Edith's knees nearly buckled. I can't. I'm no warrior. No, Eric agreed quietly. His voice meant only for her. But you're something these men have forgotten how to be. You're someone who chose mercy when revenge would have been easier. That's worth more than sword skill. Sir Godric laughed harshly. A widow against a trained knight? That's madness. Not against a knight, Eric said. Against truth. Let your champion ask her one question, any question about her actions. If she cannot answer to his satisfaction, she dies. If she can prove her honor, she lives free. The challenge was impossible and perfect at the same time. Refuse, and Eric's warriors would think him weak. Accept, and he'd have to trust that Edith could defend herself with nothing but words against men who'd already decided her guilt. Sir Dunstan, who'd remained silent through the confrontation, finally spoke. What surety do we have that your men will honor the result? Eric drew a dagger and cut his palm, letting blood drip onto the sand. By my blood and my blade, I swear it. Do you dare the same? The moment balanced on a knife's edge. 300 Vikings watched their Jarl bleed his oath into the earth. 120 Saxons waited to see if their leaders had the courage to match it. Sir Dunstan slowly dismounted and walked forward. He took Eric's dagger and cut his own palm, mixing his blood with the Jarl's in the sand. By my blood and my blade, I swear it too. But Sir Godric was already spurring his horse forward, lance lowered. Enough of this heathen nonsense. She dies now. The world seemed to slow. Edith watched the lance point racing toward her heart, heard Astrid scream her name, saw Eric's hand blur toward his axe. But there was no time, no space, no hope. Then Bjorn Ironside stepped between them. The Viking war chief caught the lance on his shield and twisted, sending Sir Godric tumbling from his saddle to land hard in the sand. Before the knight could rise, Bjorn's axe was at his throat. The ordeal was sworn, Bjorn said in broken English. Even I honor what is sworn in blood. As Sir Godric was dragged back to the Saxon lines, Eric turned to Edith one last time. Speak your truth, he said simply. Let them judge whether mercy deserves mercy in return. Edith stood alone between two armies, every eye fixed on her, the weight of hundreds of lives pressing down like stones. Her throat was dry as dust, her hands shaking, but her voice when it came was steady. You ask why I chose mercy, she said, loud enough for both sides to hear. I'll tell you. Because when I looked at that dying child, I saw something you've all forgotten. I saw myself. She turned toward the Saxon lines. When my husband died, I was broken. Hungry some days, cold most nights. My neighbors, good Christian people, crossed to the other side of the road rather than help a woman with no man to protect her. I learned what it meant to be powerless, to be dismissed, to be seen as less than human. Her voice grew stronger. So when I found a child with that same look in her eyes, the look of someone the world had abandoned, I couldn't walk away. Not because she was Viking or Saxon or anything else, because she was dying, and I remembered what dying felt like. Sir Dunstan had dismounted and was listening intently. Even some of the knights were nodding. She could have been anyone's daughter, Edith continued. She could have been the child I never had, the one I lost before she drew breath. In that moment, she wasn't my enemy's blood. She was just lost. She looked directly at Sir Godric, who was back on his feet but held in check by his own men now. You call it treason to show kindness to a child. I call it the only thing that separates us from the beasts. If we let hate decide who deserves mercy, then we become the very monsters we claim to fight. The beach fell silent except for the sound of waves and the whisper of wind through armor. Then Sir Dunstan stepped forward. The woman speaks truth, he said clearly. There is no dishonor in mercy shown to a child, whatever her blood. One by one, other voices joined his, first among the Saxons, then even from some of Eric's warriors. Not agreement necessarily, but recognition that something larger than politics was at stake here. Eric stepped beside Edith. Then we are agreed. The woman chooses her fate freely. He turned to her, and she saw in his eyes not conquest, but genuine respect. What is your choice, Edith of Saltmere? She looked once more at everything she was leaving behind. The cottage, the village, the grave where Aldred's bones rested. Then at everything she was choosing, the unknown, the dangerous, the possibility of purpose beyond mere survival. I choose to sail. As dawn broke over the North Sea, Edith stood on the deck of Eric's longship, watching her old life disappear into morning mist. Astrid stood beside her, stronger now, wearing proper clothes but still carrying Aldred's wooden cross, a gift Edith had given her the night before. "Do you regret it?" the girl asked. Edith looked ahead toward the horizon, toward whatever waited in the eastern settlements. The wind was cold on her face, the future uncertain, but for the first time in 2 years she felt truly alive. "Ask me in a year," she said. The longship cut through the waves like a blade through silk, carrying them toward a future written not by kings or jarls, but by the simple choice to show mercy when cruelty would have been easier. Sometimes the greatest journeys begin with the smallest acts of kindness. And sometimes salvation comes not from those who share your faith or your blood, but from those who simply recognize your humanity when it matters most. If you found this story moving, let us know in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between safety and what was right? Subscribe for more tales where courage changed everything, one choice at a time.